Hello and welcome to the Education on Fire podcast. The place where we share creative and inspiring learning in our schools. Episode 65. Hello and welcome back to the Education on Fire podcast with me, Mark Taylor. Today I'm joined by Rob Alvarez, and he's from the Professor Game podcast, and his input, his insights and his passion is all about gamification and how it's really aiding and abetting children to really be engaged and hands-on with education. And I'll let him describe exactly what his background is and what he's really keen and passionate about. So Rob, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Mark. I am very pleased to be here and to meet your audience.
Fabulous. So can you first give us a bit of a background about your sort of education background and how you got involved in the gamification world and how that sort of developed into a podcast for us?
For sure. I'm gonna try to cut it short as much as I can. It's a story that starts when I was like 9. I was playing video games and Nintendo, and there was this Nintendo magazine, and I said, oh, how amazing would it be to work in a magazine and play like 80% of the time, and then 20% of the other time just write about what you were playing. So that was my dream as a kid. Of course, as usual, you grow up,
Yes.
You get a job, you study, etc. I studied computer engineering or computer science, depends on how you translate the title I have. Then I did an MBA. I got started. I went through several different areas in life, and I got very, very passionate about education and the impact that it has on people, because I come from Venezuela. I'm from Latin America. And the reach of education in larger parts of Latin America is that many people don't even have the capacity to get formal education. So you can see that when a school is opened in an area that didn't have a school, the impact is incredible. It's amazing, and it changes people's lives, and it gets kids outside of crime or a future life that could be in crime and drugs and these bad things. And I realized how powerful it can get to be. And this combined, it got together when I moved to Spain. I started working. I work at a business school, at IE Business School, where we are creating, in my department, we create learning interactive materials. We call them interactive, engaging learning materials. And it all got together. I realized that there was this thing going on called gamification, and it's all about learning things from all these games that now it's a very huge industry, the video game industry. But it's not only about the video game industry, it's about the games that have been going on for centuries and how people have been designing these games. Because if you think about it, a game in itself doesn't have a purpose. You don't play a game to be smarter. You don't play a game in general. Or at least up until now, you don't play a game to improve your professional career. You don't play a game. You play a game because you want to, because it makes you feel good. And what I've come to realize, and they've been applying this to many areas, including education. But for me, it's especially powerful. And I was talking the other day to a teacher from Canada, and he was saying that he and I completely agree that there is an engagement crisis in education in many places, that it's not only about sitting there and being able to dump information into people, into kids, into the students. It's also about them actually learning something from that process, and that's something that I'm convinced, and I've seen how education is very capable of solving. Because when you have somebody engaged with the activity, and the activity is learning, it's for sure that they can learn a lot more. And while all of this got together, all these things, as I was saying, I started working in education. I started working in gamification in education. And after some time, I wanted to increase the impact of what I was doing and actually start reaching more people. And I realized that as in games, and this is something as well that you can learn from games, from modern games and video games and mobile games, the best way to reach other people is certainly not marketing. It includes marketing, but the best way is to reach other people through other people. So the idea of multiplying your message through other people. And if you're capable of training other people to do all the things that we're doing at the business school of using gamification to engage our students instead of making more ourselves. And this is my personal passion. This is not about the IE, about my work at IE. This is a personal project. I said, well, how can I personally increase the impact? And it's not creating more materials because you have so much time. It's about inspiring other people to be able to create all these amazing things that we do, and the amazing things that they're capable of doing, and completely different with different areas of expertise, different levels, and that's what it basically inspired me to get into the podcast. And I've been having a wild ride and having all these experts and people from education that give us incredible insights about how gamification can change the way that we see education.
I think what I always find amazing about the whole gaming world is, having seen children in our children grow up through our house, it's like you say, you never have to say, "Oh, can you just go and play a bit more?" It's that kind of everything you'd want a child to be like in school while they're learning, they do completely naturally while they're at home doing the gaming. They want to improve, they want to engage, they want to do it more and more often. They're happy to sit and learn the skills they need to get to the next level. They're using all sorts of brain function to kind of work out where to go and what to do and how to do it. And there's no teaching involved. They're teaching themselves, and they're just over and over and over with the repetition, getting better and better and better. And then you sort of come back a week or two later, and they're suddenly about 400% better than they were the time before when you saw them do it. And you just think, if that engagement is possible in a form, then why are we not using it for everything? And I guess that's the essence of what you're passionate about and why you're passionate about it.
Yeah, and I mean, there's two things that some people get very academic about. This is gamification and this is game-based learning, and these are games and they're separate things. And to be honest, I'm not very passionate about. I mean, I know titling and tagging things is important, but I don't think that splitting it into separate different categories is a fundamental thing. I do think that there's, as you were saying, kids, you don't need to tell a kid, please play a bit more. I mean, don't stop playing so soon. What parents tend to say is, and I got told this like more than once for sure, is, I mean, you need to stop playing and go outside and play some more. So that all those learnings that you can get from how the games engage the kids, and not only the kids. I mean, if you look at the gaming profile nowadays, the people who play mobile games, etc., it's increasingly more adults and it's increasingly more women, which was another paradigm that we used to have, that it's male gamers and all these dudes, etc. That's not the case anymore. But anyways, getting back to what you were saying, there's two things. I mean, we talk a lot about grit in education and about learning through failure and, learning how to fail and understanding that fail is not final. But and this is something I try to get into this when I talk about education, and it's about the way that we grade the students. Are we encouraging them to be able to try new things, to fail and to recover from their failures? Isn't the way that we actually use grades incentivizing them to have all this pressure and they cannot commit any mistakes, and they are actually focused on maybe memorizing some stuff rather than learning? So those kind of questions are the ones that I say, well, what if we started? And I know it's complex. I know there's many things involved. I know education is a system and systems are complex and there's many moving parts. But what if we start moving instead of towards grading them in the traditional ways and, having a high pressure exam and these kind of things where they have all this pressure and that it's a fail or pass kind of situation? What if we start seeing them in their journey of learning and let them fail a bit, learn from that failure and move on and understand that they failed in that and they will try again until they make it right. And that's actually what they learn. This is a trait that they learn in games. How many times do you have, how many lives do they spend in how they spent in a game to pass a difficult level? How many times do they just let themselves get, whether it's a violent game and get killed, or do they fall from the cliff or whatever it is until they make it? What if instead of doing all these things, they were learning something that was exciting to them? Because it's easy to forget that learning can actually be a fun, exciting experience because we in a way, this might sound terrible, and I know it's a generalization, but sometimes what we do is we put the school in the middle of their learning instead of the school helping them learn more. It becomes a sort of a barrier, and what they have to do is, these standardized tests and these things that are the things that they've always done. What if we do it through gamification? What if we take all these learnings, all these keys that we've seen from games, and I mean, I was writing a blog post which will probably come up where at the end of February, January, it's probably going to come up the early February. And I was talking about a game that I've tested out because of one of my guests. And one of the things that is amazing about that game, and many other mobile games do the same, is they have these energy levels and that you can only play so much. And when you spend it, what they want, I mean, because these are businesses, what they want is for you to spend some more money for you to continue playing. Or you have to wait. So that's a game technique that's called a torture break. Yes. What does a torture break do? It gets you to think all the time about the next time you'll be able to play. So what if instead of thinking, when will I be able to play this zombie apocalypse game again because I have no more energy left, they are thinking about, when am I going to be able to do the next experiment in science? What if we use these strategies, these techniques, and this is something that we've seen being used. I've been to, there's a few, not too many, but there's a few gamification conferences around the world, and I've gone to a couple, and one of them that impressed me massively was this Spanish nun. Her speech was in Spanish, even though the conference was in English, but her message was so powerful that they let her come. They had somebody translate. I'm not exactly sure how what the logistics went, but she was talking about how they were using this nun. I mean, that you would think, the most traditional people are these religious schools, etc. So this nun was using gamification and all these ideas, and you could see the pictures of the kids, and it was incredible. I mean, it sounds like a small thing, but I see it as huge, as massive. You could, in the pictures, you saw the kids. Normally you have all the kids sitting down in their desks, working on something or paying attention or falling asleep, whatever it is they're doing in their desks. Here, they were all gathered around something that was going on because it was an exciting story that they created around this learning objective. And they didn't even take off their backpacks. They were so excited when they came into the classroom that they rushed into this desk for everybody to be able to see and to see the next clue and the next thing that they were going to do. So I think this is a very powerful image of what you can achieve when you think about the children instead of thinking before what it is that you want to teach. Of course, you have to teach something and you have to bear that in mind, but you also have to think about what the kids are expecting. What are the emotions that are involved? How can you actually design your class to engage them? Because in the end, the education is not for us to feel good about what we're doing. It's for the kids to learn. And when we put them in the first place, it can have an incredible effect. And many of your listeners, I'm sure, that are super passionate about education and have their learners first and top of mind. I'm sure you're doing this in a way. What I would like to invite you all is to listen to podcasts, read books, and get a bit into the vibe of gamification and at least check it out to see if it resonates with you. You don't have to be a gamer. Of course, it helps, but you don't have to be a gamer. You don't have to be a game designer to understand these things. And there's amazing people. There's amazing books. There's amazing blogs. I mean, I started my journey in gamification completely for free. I mean, I didn't pay a single cent until I decided I wanted to. And that's when I became a bit more advanced, of course. But getting started and getting your feet wet into these waters is something that everybody can do.
And I mean, this podcast specifically, I'm very keen on. We could talk a lot about what we think education should be and how it could be so different. But I'm really keen on what people are doing already as an example, and that example you said of the nun and the way they were using it. So through your guests and your experience, what type of ways is gamification and actual specific games even actually being taught in some schools that you've come across?
One of the guests, actually the one that's up this week, is a teacher. His name is Scott Hebert, and he's the one I mentioned before from Canada. He has I like him very much as an example because he's a teacher. I also interview people who are experts in gamification, but this guy, he's a teacher who implemented gamification in his classroom, and he literally has he's a science teacher, and his whole classroom has a decor. I mean, it's a medieval theme. So everything in the classroom, he tries to make it look medieval. And you get into it, and of course, if you're extremely traditional in the education sense, you get in there and you say, well, these people are not learning, they're playing around. I mean, there's a bunch of kids doing something here, there's another bunch of kids doing something else around, because they have different types of days, and they do things at their rhythm. They have choice, which is something that we easily forget how powerful it can be to engage the kids. They give them choice. I mean, he says, well, we have to do all of these things. These are all the missions and all the quests that you're going to have to do, all the people that you have to engage with. These are all the things that you have to do, and they'll keep on discovering things as they do it. But it's up to you how you do it. I mean, you can have, and he called it blowing off some steam, because sometimes the kids just have a bad day. And from a mental health perspective, you can even think like, oh, well, they actually need to blow off some steam, and I'm doing air quotes here, they're goofing around, and that's okay. I mean, that doesn't mean that they're not going to do what they have to do. That doesn't mean they won't do the experiments that they have to do. That doesn't mean that they won't go around and learn with their science class. So I thought that this example was very, very powerful, and you can learn it. He has a blog, he has a YouTube, he has a book as well. There's many things that we can learn from that kind of person who's doing that. I've also interviewed people like Sylvester Arnav. He's doing the similar things, but for the university settings. He's doing extremely interesting projects for universities. He's from Coventry University. They have I'm not sure, I can't remember the name of the lab that they have, but they are experimenting with games, gamification, hybrids, hybrid solutions that are digital and non-digital. There's like a huge universe of things that you can do. But one thing that I because you said, well, maybe what's one thing that we can specifically take, and to be honest, right now I haven't seen like an app or something similar that you can just grab it and use it. I've heard a lot about Minecraft. Classcraft, which apparently is amazing. I have to confess I haven't been into it enough to give my opinion about it. And I have one of my guests also has a similar software that has a similar solution. It's called Blue Rabbit Class, and it's actually also free for teachers if you want to use it to gamify your class. And he has all these explanations about how you can use his experience and his software to implement it in your own classroom. And that's a fundamental message here, because every classroom is different, every class is different. And one thing that we stress a lot in gamification is, well, that's actually two things. The first one is to always start with the objective in mind. What's your objective? Why do you want to gamify? Because normally, especially in a class, you've probably given the class like a traditional or a regular class before. So why would you want to include gamification into your class? Why would you want to gamify that session or that class or your whole subject? Why do you want to do that? And normally the answer comes in the form of, I want to have students that are more engaged. I want to have students learning better. There's many things that you can think there. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is to think of your players, and your players are your students. And of course, different places, different cultures, different levels in education have different players, different students. And those two things are things that are very important to consider when you're designing your classroom, when you're saying, well, what I want to do in my classroom is have a medieval theme, or I want to have a theme around music because I'm very musical. And that's what I'm passionate about as a teacher. So always start with something that you are able to be passionate about and something you like. Because if you hate the whole medieval theme, there's no point in trying to make a medieval class for your students, because you're not going to enjoy it, and that's something that will show. So my first piece of advice is that to make sure that you think about those two things when you're creating your own class.
I think actually, like you say, being authentic and actually being yourself in a classroom is the most important thing, isn't it? Because that gives you the engagement with the children as well, and you can, as a I mean, it's a partnership, isn't it? I mean, the best classes are a partnership between the teacher and the students, and so to actually be able to be learning things together, and I love that whole idea of the space that you talked about there, and the fact that if you've got an objective and you've got an amount of time for these objectives to actually be achieved, it just takes the, like you said, takes the pressure away, and it kind of changes the whole atmosphere, rather than we're going to sit here for half an hour and we're going to write about this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that, because we're all individuals, and it might be that this next half an hour is a time when I really can't think about anything, because like you say, I need to chill out or go and do something else. But I know that over the course of this day or next day or this week, if depending on how far ahead you set the objectives, you've really got time for everyone to come together. And as long as you've got those boundaries, and I always think with teachers, if you can really see the goal that you want to achieve, and you can see where you want to go, and you give solid enough boundaries to say, but this is what we can do and what we can't do, but within that you've got a lot of freedom, I think you get the best of both worlds, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I've had different guests talk about very different perspectives they have. There's people who have frameworks. There's experts who have dedicated their lives as consultants of gamification. I mean, there's literally people dedicating their lives to doing gamification to products, to companies, to marketing, to employee engagement, to education, to many areas. And precisely the objective that I have with the podcast, as we were saying before, is to inspire others. And since my personal passion is education, that's what I wanted to focus the gamification podcast about. It's not just about any gamification. It's about how we can implement these examples, these things, how we can take the experience of other people who've been doing it and use it into our own classroom. And that personalization of what you're doing it's fundamental. I mean, you can't have, as you were saying, you have to be authentic. I think that's completely crucial.
And what do you think is the future of education from that point of view? Do you think gamification is something which will become more integral to how education develops, or do you think it is just something that a few people will think is a good idea and bring in, but actually the system, I know it's going to take a long time to change, if indeed it is going to change, but it's do you think it will become as mainstream as maybe some of us might hope?
We've talked about this, and not only in education. I think that in the long term, education gamification might not continue as a term. It might start getting included into many areas and into many things, and it might not be called gamification. There are some people who have like allergies to that term because they say, oh, if you're using games and gamification, you're not being serious and you're not learning, or this is a serious company, or whatever it is you're doing. And some people like have a bit of an allergy. In general, this has been dropping a bit, the resistance, but it might be called that or other things. And there's many things that we're already doing around that. In general, project-based learning is something that takes into account that maybe that's not the way it developed, but if you analyze it from a gamification perspective, there's many things that are incorporated into project-based learning that are coming in, if you see it again from that perspective, that come from the learnings of games. And if you use in your class, I always use the history example, because when I was in school, I absolutely hated history. And now I'm trying to catch up with all the things I didn't learn because I was just focused on memorizing it to get over the test and, get it done with. I'm trying to catch up because I love history now. There's a podcast I started listening to called Memoir, which talks about, and I think it's a fabulous example of something you can do even without explicitly using gamification, about how you can use fun and how the storytelling can be something that you use, and it might not be exactly precisely historically completely precise in some things, because they have dialogues and they have things, and it's impossible to know what Alexander the Great said to his father, or what to his assistant or whatever. But using all that storytelling of getting people engaged into it, what is the result when you have a podcast like that one? And when you listen to history from that kind of perspective, and I'm just using it as an example, there's many others, you actually get people to get excited about the topic. I mean, if somebody was to hate history like I did initially, and I got into it through another lens, instead of telling me, the 9th of October of 1942, this guy did this and that, and going to the test and having to say the 9th of October, that's something that it doesn't have a story. It doesn't have a way of me understanding it deeper and better so that I can actually learn. So in games, the objective of the game normally is to go from point A to point B. The easiest way would be just to draw a line, but that wouldn't be a game. That wouldn't be exciting. So what do? You have normally, well, not all games do, but many games have a story around it. And you start getting into the characters that are in the story, and you start loving them or hating them or appreciating what they do, or starting to, know that they secretly are planning something, or that they want to save the world and nobody knows, or that they were the normal person and then now they're saving the world. I mean, all these things that are into a story and that go into movies, games, and many, many, many other places. How about that be used in history, for example? And again, I come back to that example because it's deep for my heart, and it was something I didn't fail ever at school, thank God, but it was something that I'm sure I could have learned a lot more from, and I could have been a lot more passionate about. And even, who knows, I might have even majored in something else instead of engineering if I had been more passionate about history.
And I think what that really shows is the fact that because you like it now, it probably wasn't history that was the thing that you didn't like. It was just the way it was.
Sure.
It was the way it was being taught. It was the thought process of, oh my God, this is now what I've got to do, and this is what my next lesson is going to look like. This is where we're heading, and I can't bear the whole thing. And that really does come down, like you say, to the teacher and exactly the way that you actually teach it, and you bring it across, and how you bring these things alive. And there was an interesting thing that our son said earlier. I think it must have been this week, or maybe it was last week, and they were in a science lesson, and they were talking about how hot the filament is in a bulb, and he said, "Oh, it's really hot." And then I think he sort of took like an old-fashioned sort of chalkboard rubber that you'd have for a blackboard, and somehow managed to take this bulb away, and it literally just sliced the thing in half. and at that point, it's kind of, now I'm really getting this, because one, I can see how hot it is. I can't believe it's done that. And also, you're not just telling me, we can see it. This is an integral part of what I'm learning, and it's it just brings the whole thing to life, because, like you say, it's real, it's got a story, and it just makes it the thing that you want to be learning, and a place that you want to go, because you don't know what's going to happen next week or the week after. You just know it's going to be something which is something you want to attend.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also something else that just came to my mind while you were saying that. Of course, there's a lot of information that we provide in schools that is useful. Some people might argue that some of them is not useful, etc. You can get into that discussion very easily. But beyond that, you can say, well, he's going to remember maybe not the temperature where that happens, or the temperature of the filament, but he will remember that you can cut something very, very, very thick and very strong just using the filament, because it's so ridiculously hot. And the useful part, unless you're going to create filaments for your life or to create the new filaments, and in which case you'll have to learn many other things. But the useful thing for your life, if you don't follow that path, is that you have to be careful that that's very, very hot.
Yes.
you know what I mean? It's making the information useful for the person.
And also, the other thing that I find from a specific gaming point of view, having sort of watched children do it in teams, in groups, and pairs, and that kind of thing, is it's that teamwork element, isn't it? Having a shared goal and trying to work out the solutions to these puzzles, and the way they're very generous with what they've learned as well. Often it's that kind of, oh, if you go here and if you find this and if you look under here and there's a back door here and all that kind of thing. It's not about what I've learned and I'm going to keep it to myself because I want to be better than you. It's just an open sharing feel, which is integral really to especially sort of the workforce of tomorrow, because it's all about that kind of, how can we work together, how can we work in teams, how can we solve a solution, how can we just use our basic human needs and human skills, because we don't know what the problems of the future are going to be, so we need the actual skills of what's involved in that, rather than, like you said, just the imported knowledge that you can actually these days find out just from a Google search or from going anywhere else.
Yeah, and I mean, once again, as you were saying, the information can be found anywhere. I mean, it's not like 200 years ago that just having access to that book and having read that made you have, 95% advantage over the rest of the world because you knew that. That's no longer the case. So why are we teaching the same way that we used to teach 200 years ago? That's a big question. And I'm not saying that because it's bad, it's wrong. All I'm saying is, have we thought about what we might need to change because things are changing? That's the deep reflection I would like to leave there in the sense of education. And another thing I would like to add is the what you were talking about, the social aspect. And this is something that's definitely a key lesson that I've taken from games. I'm not exactly the social gamer that many people that are, strong gamers are. I'm not a strong gamer myself. I just play occasionally, but I'm not the kind of person who's very much into playing very socially. But I do realize the power that it has. And when you have all these guilds and all these people collaborating to reach an objective, what is more alike to the workplace and to what they're actually going to find outside the world than the importance of working in teams, learning from other people, incorporating other people's feedback, being able to work with them, even though, I mean, I've seen very few workplaces that are absolutely perfect and you don't have a difficult coworker that you have to deal with. And that's exactly what you have to deal with when you do something with your teammates in school. So that part as well of the social learning and helping each other out and even mentoring people that could be even in your same class, but there might be this kid who's like super good in math and can help the other kids understand math better. And there's so much power that we can take from that, from the social learning, from including the possibility. And that's another example. I was talking about history previously, but what about in math? Thing was not whether or not you got the answer correct the first time, but whether or not you're able to reach the correct answer, which is in the end what you need to do in the workplace. You'd have to be able to reach the final solution to whatever it is you're trying to solve. What if we gave them the opportunity to do it over and over again? Wouldn't they actually learn from that? And I'm not trying to be unfair here with teachers, because I know that there's many things that you have to do when you have to correct a test, for instance. So I'm not taking it on the teacher himself or herself. So but when you have a test, you have to grade the test, and they get the feedback maybe 2 weeks later. What do they do with that feedback? They're not going to be tested on the same thing again. Chances are very low. They probably forgot what they were tested on by that time. They probably forgot why they were mistaken around that. So the thing of instant feedback and getting them to be able to do it over again and say, "Oh, I got it wrong. Can I do it again?" Why don't we let them do it again? Why don't we let them succeed at the second, at the third, at the fourth attempt? I mean, what's wrong with that? I'm not saying if we follow the traditional guidelines, of course, we have to put a limit to that. But why don't we change the way these traditional guidelines are going on to let them try again? Not just for the grade, because again, the grade must not be the objective for the student. It must be to learn. So why don't we let them learn freely? I mean, allow them that opportunity to actually learn.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things there which just struck me. One is the fact that one other thing which would be incredibly helpful for the students would be that that's really great that you've managed to work it out and you've managed to find an answer. How many other people in the class, or the people that you're working with, or maybe a different class, can you help explain that to who haven't managed to work it out yet? Because then not only have they found out the answer, but they're then having to then think about how they would then explain it and teach it to someone else, either their peer or maybe someone slightly younger. And so they're having to rethink of the whole thing again in a different way, and being able to bounce those ideas off of everybody and actually just see it in a slightly different way to still get the same objective is an incredibly skillful thing, which is going to really help you in the years to come, I'm sure. And the second thing was the fact that today I've been teaching drums in a school, and I say it week in, week out to everybody. It's that, why do you expect to be able to get it right the very first time that you do it? We're teaching coordination. We're trying to strengthen neural pathways. We're trying to really help our coordination in something you've never done before. I'm more interested in about supporting each time that you do it right, and you find a way to be able to do it right again and again and again, so then it becomes second nature, that we can then introduce something else and go off on a slightly different tangent. That way we're going to be learning and growing, and as long as you understand what's going on, you can then start to teach yourself, which means that my job is done then, and surely from an education point of view, unless you want to be in education for your entire life, we just need to be supporting them to find out how to learn, how they learn individually as well, which is what I liked about having the scope to be actually sort of explore your ideas and find where you're going, and then just be effectively released to sort of go for what it is that you want, whether it's a certain academic subject or a certain way of learning or a certain career that you want, and just be sort of left to fly.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a final example, another one of my guests was recently talking about how he's a gamification consultant, so he does it in many areas. But he was talking about how when he reaches a client, he says, well, one of the things that we do is we give them a workshop on how to do gamification to the users, the people who are actually going to use the software or whatever it is solution that we're creating. And we get them to design the initial things. What about we do this kind of thing in education? As you were saying, what about if teaching the next generation depends on the current generation of students that you have? I mean, what if, say, you're giving fifth graders a class? What if the people that are right now in fourth grade will get the class or will get their class according to the advice that you have received from your current fifth graders? What about if we involve them in the process of creating the class? And of course, they understand themselves. I mean, they see the world, they see their friends, they know what they're motivated by. There's many things that they can help you in that process of co-creation. Maybe you're not going to go all in and change the whole thing from day one, but what if you start making small tweaks? Or maybe the next session you see that there's this student who already knows how to do all these things, and you ask him, well, how would you teach this subject? What would you do? And get them, and you get two things from that. The first one, of course, is that student will learn exponentially more, because when you think about how you have to teach it to somebody else, that's a profound learning process, and that's been proven in many studies. But the second thing that you get is that teaching, that learning, that way, that method that is used, the examples that he might be using are a lot closer to the audience. And because we have to face it, even the youngest teachers are 10, 15, 20 years 30 years away from the age of the people that we're teaching. So there's many generational things that we might not be able to catch, even if we try really hard. And I know that the professors and teachers do a great job at relating to their students, but there's always things that are going to escape us, for sure. So why not have the help of the experts in that sense? As you were saying, I think that's fundamental, and that's actually fabulous.
Yeah, I think it's great, and I find that quite exciting. I can see almost like a whole term or year's worth of work just as an experiment, just to see, like you say, rather than just changing the whole system, but just how can I just do this here? How can I just do that there in this scenario? How can I do those small tweaks? And gamification isn't about, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in 30 Nintendos and we're going to sit around and play all day. It's understanding exactly what's involved and being able to incorporate that. And I think that's a fantastic idea for just exciting and inspiring children for the future. So, Rob, thanks so much. It's been really great chatting to you. Can you just give us the best way to contact you and the best way for them to listen to your podcast so that they can learn even more about this really interesting subject?
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. Again, thank you for inviting me to this interview. The best way to contact with me is where I'm most active is on Twitter. So my name, Rob Alvarez B. I'm guessing that will be in the show notes, but anyways, you can also see it on the webpage. It's professorgame.com. You'll see there all the episodes. If you want to go specifically only to the podcast episodes, you can do /podcast. Or if you want to listen to it on your favorite app for listening to podcasts such as Education on Fire, you can also find it on Stitcher, iTunes, Apple Podcasts. I've recently submitted it to iHeart, Spotify. I mean, I'm trying to be in every single platform available. But if you go to professorgame.com, you'll see the main outlets that we have over there.
That's fantastic. And as Rob said, yes, if you go to educationonfire.com and just search for Professor Game in the search bar, the show notes will pop up, and we'll have all those links and everything for you, just to literally one click through to find everything that you need. So brilliant. Rob, thanks again for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been a really interesting discussion, and I'm sure we're going to have more in the future, because I can feel that we've got a shared passion for this, which has got some legs still to run.
For sure. Just feel free to let me know if there's anything I can do for you. There's many things that can be available in the webpage in the future for people to create materials. I'm working on some things to offer for free for you to create your own gamified materials, for you how to gamify your first class, etc. So those are things that will be available for you, of course, and for your audience whenever they want to reach out.
That's great. Lovely. Thanks so much. Thanks for listening to the Education on Fire podcast. For more information of each episode and to get in touch, go to educationonfire.com. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.